I'm writing this because I need to get it out. It's been 3 years since I left Iowa, and I still can't sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. My therapist says writing it down might help, so here goes. This happened in the summer of 2021 in a small town called Hickory Mills, about 40 minutes west of Cedar Rapids. Population 847, 1 stoplight, 2 churches, and endless fields of corn that stretched so far you could forget the rest of the world existed. I moved there in May of that year, right after I graduated college with a degree in environmental science and absolutely no job prospects. My Uncle Frank owned a 280-acre farm out there, corn and soybeans mostly, and he needed help for the season. The pay wasn't great, but it included a small house on the property, utilities covered, and I was broke enough that it sounded like a lifeline. The house was this old farmhand cottage about a quarter mile from the main house, sitting right at the edge of the north field. White paint peeling off the sides, a porch that creaked when you breathed on it, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But it was mine, at least for the summer. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., coffee so strong it could strip paint, then out into the fields to check irrigation lines, monitor crop health, and do whatever else Uncle Frank needed. The work was hard but simple, honest. By 7 p.m., I'd be back at the cottage, too tired to do anything but microwave something and watch whatever I could get on my laptop with the spotty internet. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and after sunset, the only sounds were crickets, the occasional coyote, and the wind moving through the corn like ocean waves. If I'd known what was hiding in those fields, I would have left that first week. By mid-June, the corn was already shoulder height and growing fast. Uncle Frank said it was going to be a good year. Plenty of rain, warm nights, everything the crop needed. He'd drive over every few days in his pickup to check on things and bring me supplies from town. Mostly he'd just grunt, look at the sky, nod, and drive off. He wasn't much for conversation, which suited me fine. I was starting to like the solitude. No roommates, no traffic, no obligations beyond the work. Just me and the land and the sky. The cottage had this routine quality to it that I found comforting. Every morning, the sun would hit my bedroom window at exactly 5:47 a.m. The coffee maker would gurgle and hiss for precisely 3 minutes. The floorboards would creak in the same spots as I walked to the bathroom. There was something meditative about it all, like I was finally slowing down after 4 years of college chaos. I'd sit on the porch some evenings with a beer, watching the sunset turn the corn tips gold, and think that maybe this simple life wasn't so bad after all. I even started taking walks before bed, just short ones down the dirt road that ran alongside the north field. The air would cool off after dark, and you could see more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. No light pollution, no noise, just me and the universe. I'd walk maybe 10 minutes out, then turn around and head back. It became my ritual, my way of clearing my head before sleep. I wish I'd stayed inside. The first time I noticed something wrong was June 23rd. I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday, and I'd called her earlier that day. The walk that night started like all the others, around 10 p.m., just after I'd finished watching some documentary about ocean ecosystems. The moon was almost full, bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. The corn rustled softly on both sides of the road, and I had my hands in my pockets, just enjoying the quiet. About 8 minutes into the walk, I heard something that made me stop. It was a sound coming from inside the cornfield on my right. Not the normal rustling of wind through stalks. This was different, heavier, like something large moving through the rows, deliberately, pushing the stalks aside. I stood there on the road, listening. My first thought was deer. We had plenty of them, and they'd sometimes bed down in the fields at night. But deer move in a specific way, quick, nervous, with lots of stopping and starting. This sound was steady, purposeful, walking. I called out, "Hello!" My voice sounded small in all that darkness. The movement stopped. I waited maybe 30 seconds, hearing nothing but my own heartbeat and the normal wind sounds. Then I laughed at myself. Probably just a deer after all, spooked by my voice, and I kept walking. But I turned around a minute earlier than usual that night, and I walked a little faster on the way back. When I got to the cottage and locked the door behind me, I felt stupid for being nervous. This was farm country. Animals moved through fields. It was completely normal. I drank a glass of water, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. But as I was lying there in the dark, I heard it again. That same sound. Except now it was closer. Much closer. Right outside the cottage, in fact, moving along the edge of the cornfield that started maybe 20 feet from my bedroom window. That night, something found me, and it never really left. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The sound was distinctive now that I was paying attention. A steady crunch, crunch, crunch of footsteps through the dry leaves and broken stalks at the field's edge. Heavy footsteps, human-sized, walking slowly, deliberately, like someone was pacing back and forth just beyond my property line. I got out of bed and moved to the window, careful not to make noise. The curtains were thin, and moonlight spilled through them enough that I could see the outline of the corn stalks swaying maybe 15 feet away. The footsteps continued for another minute, back and forth, then stopped completely. I stood at that window for 20 minutes, barely breathing, watching for any movement. Nothing. Eventually I convinced myself it had been a raccoon or possum, something that sounded bigger than it was in the quiet of night. I got back in bed but didn't sleep well. Every little sound made my eyes snap open. The next morning, I walked over to where I'd heard the sounds. The ground at the edge of the field was pretty trampled, but that made sense, since I'd been walking around there checking irrigation earlier in the week. I didn't see anything unusual. No tracks, no broken stalks arranged weird. Nothing. In the bright June sunlight, with birds singing and the sky clear blue, my nighttime fear seemed ridiculous. I actually felt embarrassed about it. Uncle Frank came by that afternoon with groceries. I almost mentioned it to him but decided against it. What was I going to say? Hey, I heard something walking around last night and got scared. He already thought city kids were soft. No need to confirm it. For the next week, everything was normal. I did my work, took my evening walks, slept fine. The incident faded in my memory, became just one of those weird moments you have and then forget about. The corn kept growing. It was over my head now in most places, thick and green and healthy. Uncle Frank was pleased. "Best crop in 5 years," he said. "Your good luck, kid." I should have told him what I heard. Maybe he would have known what it meant. July hit Iowa like a furnace. Temperatures in the mid-90s every day, humidity so thick you could chew it. I started doing most of my field work early in the morning and late in the evening to avoid the worst heat. The cottage didn't have air conditioning, just a couple of box fans that mostly pushed hot air around. I'd take cold showers twice a day and sit on the porch in nothing but shorts, drinking ice water and waiting for sunset. It was during one of those brutally hot evenings, July 9th, I think, that I saw the figure. I was on the porch around 8 p.m., watching the sky turn orange and purple. The corn was tall enough now that sitting on the porch, I could only see the tops of the stalks, everything else hidden below. It created this weird effect where the world ended about 50 feet away in every direction, replaced by a wall of green. I was scrolling through my phone, not paying much attention to anything, when movement caught my eye. Someone was standing in the cornfield. About 30 feet out, barely visible between the stalks, there was a person, just standing there, completely still. I couldn't make out features, the stalks were too dense, and the light was fading, but I could see the shape of a head, shoulders, the vertical line of a human body, standing motionless in the middle of the field, facing toward my cottage. I stood up from my chair, which made a loud scrape against the porch boards. The figure didn't move. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded uncertain. "Can I help you?" Nothing. The figure remained exactly as still as the corn around it. Not swaying, not shifting weight, just standing there like a statue. I felt cold despite the heat. This wasn't right. Nobody just stood in someone else's cornfield like that. And how had they gotten there without me hearing them push through the stalks? I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward where I'd seen the shape. The beam cut through the dimness, illuminating the corn. I swept it back and forth across the area. Nothing. Nobody there. But I know what I saw, and it saw me too. I kept the flashlight pointed at the field for another 5 minutes, scanning slowly back and forth. My hand was shaking slightly. The corn swayed in the evening breeze, creating endless patterns of shadow and light. Could I have imagined it? Mistaken some configuration of stalks for a human shape? I wanted to believe that, but the image was burned into my mind. The proportions were too perfect, too distinctly human. The way it had been positioned turned toward me, watching. I went inside and locked the door. Then I checked the lock twice more to make sure it had actually engaged. I closed all the curtains, even though it made the cottage even hotter. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, trying to decide if I should call Uncle Frank and say what? That I saw someone in the field who disappeared? He'd tell me it was probably just someone from town taking a shortcut or a trick of the light, and maybe he'd be right. But I didn't take my evening walk that night, or the next night, or the night after that. The heat wave continued. Temperatures stayed in the 90s all week, only dropping to the mid-70s at night. The cottage became an oven. I'd lie in bed with both fans pointed at me, sweating through my sheets, unable to sleep. And every night, I'd hear something outside. Not every time, but often enough. Footsteps. That same slow, deliberate crunching sound, pacing along the edge of the field. Sometimes it would last 5 minutes. Sometimes an hour. I stopped looking out the windows. I didn't want to see what was making the sound. Uncle Frank noticed I was off when he came by on July 15th. "You look like hell," he said, which was about as concerned as he ever got. "You sleeping okay in this heat?" "Not really," I admitted. "It's pretty rough without AC." He nodded. "Yeah, I should get a unit installed in there. Tell you what, you can come sleep in the main house if you need to. Guest rooms open." I almost said yes. Almost. But something stubborn in me refused to admit I was scared. "I'm fine," I said. "Thanks, though. That might have been the biggest mistake I made." The corn reached its full height in mid-July, well over 7 feet tall, creating these narrow corridors between the rows that felt like tunnels. Walking through them during my work checks, I'd get this claustrophobic feeling like the walls were closing in. You couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The stalks blocked out most of the light, creating this dim green world underneath where the air barely moved. It smelled like earth and growing things and something else I couldn't identify. Something that reminded me of the way a basement smells when it's been locked up too long. I started finding things during my checks. Small things. Weird things. In one row, there were stalks that had been bent down at waist height, all in the same direction, creating this arrow shape pointing toward my cottage. Could have been wind damage, except it was only those specific stalks, and they were bent too perfectly. In another area, I found a dead crow hanging from a stalk by a piece of twine around its neck. The bird was fresh, still had all its feathers, no sign of decay. But who hangs a bird like that? And why? I took pictures of both with my phone but didn't show them to Uncle Frank. I don't know why. Maybe I was starting to feel like if I acknowledged it all out loud, it would become more real, more dangerous. As long as I kept it to myself, I could pretend it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. On July 19th, I found the first message. I was checking the irrigation line in the north section, about 100 yards from the cottage, when I noticed a small clearing between the rows. Not natural. Someone had cut down maybe a dozen stalks to create a circular space about 6 feet across. And in the center of that space, arranged on the ground, were rocks. Small rocks, positioned to form words. Leave. I should have left right then. Should have packed my stuff and driven back to civilization. But fear has a way of paralyzing you. I kicked the rocks apart and left the clearing, walking quickly back toward the cottage. My hands were trembling. Back inside, I locked the door and sat down at my kitchen table, trying to think clearly. The rational part of my brain said I should call the police. This was trespassing, vandalism, possibly stalking. But the police were in Cedar Rapids, 40 minutes away, and what would they do? Come look at some bent corn stalks and a dead bird? Tell me it was probably kids from town playing pranks? And something else bothered me. The message said leave, not stay away or get out, but leave. Like whatever was out there didn't just want me to avoid the fields. It wanted me gone from the property entirely. That felt personal, targeted. I called Uncle Frank. This time I didn't care about seeming scared or weak. This had gone too far. "Hey," I said when he answered. "Do you know anyone who might have a problem with me being here? Anyone from town who's said anything?" There was a pause. "What? No. Why?" I told him about the message, about the bent stalks and the dead bird, about the figure I'd seen and the sounds at night. Everything came tumbling out. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "You sure about all this?" he finally asked. "Yes, I'm sure." Another pause. "Look, I've been farming this land for 30 years. Nobody's ever bothered me or my property. You might be, I don't know, stressed out? Sometimes the isolation gets to people." "Uncle Frank," someone wrote leave in rocks. "That's not stress." Okay. He sighed. "Tell you what, I'll come by tomorrow morning and we'll walk the fields together. If someone's been messing around, we'll find evidence. And if it keeps happening, we'll call the sheriff." Fair. It wasn't fair, but it was all I had. That night was the worst yet. I tried to stay awake, sitting on my couch with a kitchen knife on the coffee table in front of me. Ridiculous, but it made me feel slightly safer. The fans hummed, pushing around hot air. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call 911 if anything happened. The curtains were closed, but every sound outside made my heart jump. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps started again. But this time they weren't at the edge of the field. They were closer, on the dirt path between the field and the cottage. Slow, heavy steps coming closer to my front door. I sat frozen on the couch, knife in hand, watching the door like it might explode inward at any second. The steps reached my porch. I could hear the boards creaking under someone's weight, one creak at a time as they crossed from one side to the other. They were pacing back and forth on my porch, right outside the door. For 15 minutes, I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there in the dim light from my phone screen, gripping that knife so hard my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to call out, to yell at whoever was out there to go away. But a deeper, more primitive part of my brain told me to stay silent. That making noise would be the worst thing I could do. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. I heard nothing for about 30 seconds. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, there was a scratching sound at the door. Not knocking, scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. 3 long scratches, a pause, then 3 more. That sound still wakes me up at night. The scratching stopped. Footsteps moved off the porch, back toward the field. I heard the corn stalks rustle as something pushed into them. Then silence. I sat there until sunrise, never moving from the couch, never putting down the knife. When the sun finally came up and light started seeping through the curtains, I felt like I could breathe again. I unlocked the door and looked outside. There on my porch, clearly visible in the morning light, were muddy footprints. Barefoot prints, adult-sized, distinctly human, tracking back and forth across the porch boards just like I'd heard. They came from the direction of the field and returned to it. I followed them with my eyes to where they disappeared into the corn. And there, on my door, were the scratches. 3 parallel gouges in the wood, repeated twice, deep enough that they'd gone through the paint down to the bare wood underneath. Uncle Frank arrived around 7 a.m. I was still standing on the porch, staring at the footprints. He got out of his truck, took one look at me, and his expression changed. I must have looked like a complete wreck. I hadn't slept, my hair was sticking up everywhere, and I was still holding the kitchen knife. "Jesus, kid," he said. "What happened?" I showed him the footprints, the scratches, told him about the night. He examined everything carefully, his weathered face growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he stood there for a long moment, hands on his hips, looking out at the corn. "Someone's fucking with you," he said finally. "But this is beyond pranks. This is threatening. We need to call the sheriff." But we were already too late to stop what was coming. Sheriff Miller showed up around 10 a.m., an older guy with a substantial gut and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many small-town problems. He took photos of the footprints and scratches, wrote down my statement, walked around the property taking notes. He seemed to take it seriously, which was a relief. But when he came back to talk to us, standing there in the morning sun while cicadas screamed from the trees, his news wasn't encouraging. "No doubt someone's been here," he said. "The prints are clear, the scratches are real. Problem is, without catching them in the act or having some idea who it might be, there's not much I can do. Could be someone with mental health issues, could be someone playing sick jokes. You know anyone who'd want to scare you?" "No," I said. "I don't know anyone here except my uncle." "What about from back home? Old girlfriend? Someone you had a falling out with?" I shook my head. I'd had a girlfriend in college, but we'd broken up amicably 6 months ago. My friend group had all scattered after graduation. I couldn't think of a single person who'd drive to rural Iowa to terrorize me. Miller sucked his teeth. "Well, I'll file a report. I'll have deputies drive by when they can. And I'd recommend you stay somewhere else for a few nights, just to be safe. You got family nearby?" Uncle Frank cleared his throat. "He can stay at my place." "Good. Do that." Miller looked at me seriously. "Whoever this is, they're escalating. Started with sounds, moved to messages, now they're coming right up to your door. That progression worries me. Don't be alone out here until we figure this out." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a person at all. I moved my stuff to Uncle Frank's main house that afternoon. He set me up in the guest room. A simple space with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the south fields. It felt safer being in a house with someone else, with locks on all the doors and windows, with another person who would hear if something happened. That first night at Frank's place, I slept for 12 hours straight, my body finally catching up on all the sleep I'd lost. But the relief didn't last long. On the second night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The house was dark and quiet. Frank's bedroom was downstairs. I could hear him snoring through the floor. I padded down the hallway to the bathroom, half asleep. Did my business, washed my hands, and was heading back to my room when I happened to glance out the hallway window that overlooked the north fields. Someone was standing in the front yard. The moon was bright enough that I could see the figure clearly, about 50 feet from the house, standing perfectly still on the gravel driveway. Same as before, human-shaped, completely motionless, facing toward the house. Toward me. Even from that distance, even through the window, I could feel that it was looking at me specifically. My entire body went cold. I stumbled backward from the window, my back hitting the wall. This couldn't be happening. I'd moved. I'd done what they wanted. And yet here they were following me. I ran downstairs and shook Uncle Frank awake. "There's someone outside," I hissed. "In the driveway, just standing there." Frank came awake fast for a guy his age. He grabbed a flashlight and a shotgun from his closet. I didn't even know he had a gun, and we went to the front door. He turned on the porch light and opened the door, shotgun held low but ready. The driveway was empty. Whatever it was, it could move impossibly fast, or impossibly silent, or maybe it was never really there at all. We searched the yard with the flashlight. Nothing. No footprints in the gravel, no disturbed grass. No sign anyone had been there. Frank lowered the shotgun, his jaw tight. "You're sure you saw someone?" "Yes, right there." I pointed to where the figure had been standing. He studied me for a long moment. I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. The worry that maybe his nephew was losing it, cracking under pressure, seeing things that weren't there. "Maybe you were still half asleep," he said carefully. "Sometimes when you wake up sudden, your brain plays tricks. I know what I saw." Okay. He rubbed his face. "Let's get back to bed. Tomorrow I'm calling Miller again, and we're going to search those fields top to bottom. If someone's hiding in there, we'll find them." But I knew we wouldn't, because I was starting to understand that this wasn't a person. People leave tracks. People get tired. People need to eat and sleep and occasionally make mistakes. Whatever was out there in the corn had been doing this for almost a month without once being caught, without once leaving evidence beyond what it wanted us to see. It appeared and disappeared like smoke. It knew where I was no matter where I went. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat by my window with the lights off, watching the fields, waiting for the figure to appear again. Didn't, but just before dawn, as the sky was starting to lighten, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. In the corn, moving through the rows parallel to the house, there were lights. Small, pale lights, maybe a dozen of them, bobbing and weaving between the stalks like fireflies. But these weren't fireflies. They were too large, too bright, too organized in their movement. They seemed to be circling the house, always staying deep enough in the corn that I couldn't see what was carrying them. The lights moved in complete silence. No rustling stalks, no footsteps, nothing. I watched them for 20 minutes until they finally faded away as the sun rose. That morning, I knew I had to go back to the cottage. If I wanted answers, they were there. Uncle Frank tried to talk me out of it. "You're staying here," he insisted over breakfast. "No point going back there if it's not safe. Someone's still out in those fields," I said. "And they're going to keep doing this until, I don't know, until something happens. The sheriff isn't going to find anything. You know he's not. This is beyond normal." "What are you saying? You think it's ghosts or something?" Frank's tone was skeptical but not mocking. I think he was starting to feel it too, that wrongness hanging over his property. "I don't know what it is, but it wants something from me, and the only way to figure that out is to go back." He didn't like it, but he eventually agreed to drive me to the cottage that afternoon. We'd go together, search the immediate area, and if I was going to stay there, against his strong advice, at least I'd be armed. He lent me the shotgun and showed me how to use it. "Birdshot," he said. "Won't kill someone unless you're real close, but it'll scare the hell out of them and probably hurt enough to stop them. Keep it by your bed. And if anything happens, you call 911 first, then me." We drove over to the cottage in his truck around 2 p.m. The place looked exactly as I'd left it. Door still scratched, muddy footprints mostly faded from the porch but still visible. Inside, everything was where I'd left it, covered in a few days' worth of dust. The cottage felt smaller than I remembered, more exposed. Uncle Frank and I spent the next 2 hours walking the fields around the property. We found the clearing where I'd seen the rock message. The rocks were still scattered where I'd kicked them. We found some areas where stalks had been pushed down or broken, but that could have been animals. We found nothing that explained any of it. No camping gear, no trash, no evidence of someone living out there. The corn just grew thick and tall and green, row after row, stretching away in all directions. "I don't like this," Frank said as the sun started dropping toward the horizon. "I don't like you being out here alone. I'll be fine. I have the gun." I was lying. I didn't think I'd be fine at all. Frank left reluctantly as it got dark, making me promise to call if anything, and he emphasized anything, happened. I locked the door behind him and set up my defenses for the night. Shotgun leaning against the wall next to my bed. Loaded, safety on. Kitchen knife on the nightstand. Phone fully charged. All windows locked, all curtains closed. I made myself dinner but couldn't eat much. My stomach was in knots. I knew it would come tonight. I could feel it. Around 10 p.m., I heard the corn start to rustle. Not wind rustle, this was deliberate movement coming from multiple directions. I turned off all the lights in the cottage and stood in the dark living room, listening. The sounds grew closer. Footsteps, multiple sets of them, moving through the field toward me from different angles. And between the footsteps, I heard something else. A sound I can barely describe. It was like whispering, but not quite. More like the corn itself was making sounds, dry stalks rubbing together to create something that almost sounded like words. The footsteps reached the edge of the field, maybe 30 feet from my cottage. Then they stopped. Everything went silent. I stood there in the dark, sweating despite the fans, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. 1 minute passed. 2, 5. Then came a knock at my door. 3 heavy knocks, patient and measured. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Another 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. A voice came from outside, raspy, wet. Wrong. We know you're in there. That wasn't a human voice. I don't care what anyone says. That was not human. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I pulled up 911, my thumb hovering over the call button. Another voice joined the first, this one higher pitched but equally wrong. Come outside. We want to see you. Then a third voice, a fourth, a fifth, all speaking at once, overlapping, some from the front of the cottage, some from the sides, some from behind. They weren't saying the same things. Each voice seemed to be having its own one-sided conversation, and none of it made sense. Caught fragments. Under the soil for so long. Why did you plant over us? Can't sleep with the roots growing through. Need to show you where we are. Come to the deep rows. The voices continued for maybe 2 minutes, talking over each other, creating this horrible chorus of wet, raspy sounds. Then they stopped all at once. Silence crashed back over everything. I stood there for another minute, waiting. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps this time, but dragging sounds, like something heavy being pulled through the dirt. Multiple somethings, judging by the sound, all moving in a circle around the cottage. The dragging went on for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. I couldn't imagine what could make that sound. What was being dragged? By what? Finally, that stopped too. The night went back to just normal field sounds, crickets, the breeze. I waited until dawn, never moving from that spot in my living room, before I opened the door. The ground around my cottage had been disturbed. The grass and dirt showed clear drag marks, forming a complete circle around the building, maybe 15 feet out from the walls. Like something had been dragged around and around my home, creating a boundary. And at the edge of the corn, there were new footprints. Dozens of them, all barefoot, all different sizes, leading into the field like whatever made them had simply walked out of the corn, done their business and walked back in. I should have left right then, but I needed to know what was under the corn. I called Uncle Frank and told him what happened. He came over immediately, looked at the evidence, and his face went pale. "That's it," he said. "You're done here. We're calling this harvest a loss, getting you out, and I'm selling this property. I don't care what the hell is going on, but it ends now." "No," I said. He stared at me. "What?" "They said something last night, about being under the soil, about roots growing through them, about planting over them. Frank, I think something's buried in this field." "So what? Even if something is, it's not your problem. Let the next owner deal with it. They specifically targeted me, not you. You've been farming here 30 years and never had a problem. I show up and this starts. Why? What's different?" He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, really. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left now, without understanding what was happening, it would follow me. This wasn't just about the cottage or the field anymore. This had become personal. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I decided to dig. I spent that day preparing. I bought a shovel from the hardware store in town, along with a pickaxe and work gloves. I printed out the property survey maps from the county records online, checking if there was any history to this land. According to the records, the property had been farmland since the 1890s, owned by a family named Dietrich until 1952, then sold to another farmer, then another until Uncle Frank bought it in 1991. No buildings had ever been recorded on the north section where my cottage sat. No cemetery, no structures, nothing notable. Just corn year after year for over a century. But something about the 1952 sale bothered me. I dug deeper into the county archives, scrolling through old newspaper scans until I found a story from August 1952. The headline made my skin crawl: Dietrich family missing. Search continues for family of 5. The article described how Joseph Dietrich, his wife Martha, and their 3 children, ages 12, 9, and 6, had vanished from their farm in late July 1952. The last time anyone saw them was July 28th. Their truck was still in the barn. All their belongings were still in the house. But the family was gone. A massive search had been conducted, involving hundreds of volunteers combing the area. They were never found. The case went cold. The property was sold by distant relatives to settle debts. And here I was, living on that exact property 70 years later. The corn had been growing over them all this time. I showed the article to Uncle Frank. He read it slowly, his expression darkening. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "I never knew about this. The guy I bought from never mentioned it. Maybe he didn't know either. Or maybe that's why he sold it. So what are you thinking? The family's buried somewhere in the field. That's what the voices said. Under the soil. Can't sleep with the roots growing through. They want to be found." Frank was quiet for a long time. Then, "If that's true, if they're really out there, we need to call the police. This is a crime scene. Multiple murders, most likely. You can't just start digging. What are we going to tell them? That ghosts asked me to dig them up. We tell them about the newspaper article. We tell them about suspicious activity on the property. Let them decide if it's worth investigating." He had a point, but I also knew how that would go. Sheriff Miller would take a report, maybe pass it up to someone, and then it would sit on a desk somewhere while they decided whether a 70-year-old cold case was worth the resources. Meanwhile, whatever was in that field would keep escalating. Keep coming closer. Keep getting more aggressive. "I'm going to look," I said, "tonight, just to see if there's anything there. If I find something, then we call the police with actual evidence." Uncle Frank shook his head but didn't argue anymore. I think part of him wanted to know too. Wanted to understand what had been growing in his soil all these years. That night, I walked into the corn with a shovel and a flashlight, and I found out some truths are buried for good reason. I waited until midnight to start. The moon was waning but still bright enough to see by. I took the shotgun, the flashlight, the shovel, and my phone. Uncle Frank had wanted to come with me, but I told him no. If something happened, I needed someone who knew where I was and could send help. We compromised. I'd text him every 30 minutes to confirm I was okay. If he didn't hear from me, he'd call the sheriff. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks, and there was almost no breeze. The corn stood absolutely still around me as I walked into the field, following the main irrigation path north. I decided to start searching in the area where I'd first heard the movement, where the voices had seemed loudest. It was about 200 yards from the cottage, deep enough into the field that the stalks surrounded me completely. Standing there in that green darkness, surrounded by corn that towered over my head, I felt like I was in a cathedral or a tomb. The flashlight beam cut through the shadows between the rows, creating long corridors of light that disappeared into blackness. I picked a spot more or less at random, a small gap between rows where the soil looked slightly sunken, and I started to dig. The ground was hard at first, packed down by decades of farming equipment and weather. But once I got through the top 6 inches, the soil became looser, darker. Rich Iowa earth that had been growing crops for over a century. I dug carefully, not wanting to damage anything I might find. One shovelful at a time. Sweat started running down my face despite the cool air. I was about 2 feet down when the shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. The sound was unmistakable metal on wood. I froze, my heart suddenly racing. I set down the shovel and dropped to my knees, using my hands to brush away the soil. My flashlight revealed old, rotted wood. Planks, arranged in a rectangular shape. Like a box, like a coffin. I'd found them. God help me, I'd found them. My hands were shaking as I cleared more dirt away. The wood was in bad shape, deteriorated by time and moisture, crumbling under my fingers. I could see gaps between the planks now, and in those gaps, in the beam of my flashlight, I could see something pale. Something that might have been cloth once or skin. I pulled back, breathing hard, my mind reeling. They were here, the Dietrich family, or some of them at least, buried in an unmarked grave in the middle of what was now a cornfield. Buried shallow and forgotten, with nothing but 2 feet of soil and 70 years of crops growing over them. The sheer horror of it made my stomach turn. What had happened to them? Who had killed them and buried them here? I needed to call the police. Now, this was beyond anything I could handle. I pulled out my phone to dial 911, and that's when I heard the movement behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam sweeping across the corn. Figures were standing in the rows. Multiple figures, surrounding the small clearing where I'd been digging. They were between the stalks, partially hidden, but I could see their outlines. Human-shaped, utterly still, and they were all facing toward me. I counted at least 7 of them, maybe more further back in the darkness. My throat had gone completely dry. Couldn't move, couldn't speak. The shotgun was leaning against a corn stalk 5 feet away. I'd set it down to dig. Might as well have been a mile. Then one of the figures stepped forward into my flashlight beam, and I saw it clearly for the first time. What I saw wasn't human. Not anymore. It was the shape of a person, had the basic proportions, the limbs, the head, but the details were all wrong. The skin was the color of old leather, stretched tight over bones. The face was sunken, eyeless, the mouth hanging open in a silent scream. It was naked, or what was left of clothing had long since rotted away. And growing from its body, growing through it, were corn roots. Thin white roots had pushed through the skin in dozens of places, emerging from the chest, the arms, the legs, weaving in and out like the thing was being slowly consumed by the plant life around it. Some of the roots were as thick as my finger. It raised one arm slowly, pointing at the grave I'd uncovered. When it spoke, that same wet, raspy voice from the night before emerged from its ruined mouth. "You see us now." The other figures stepped forward, one by one, into the light. All of them had the same characteristics: desiccated, root-covered, more plant than human now. Different sizes. A tall one that might have been a man, a shorter one probably a woman, and 3 small ones, children, the Dietrich family, still here, still aware, trapped somehow between death and whatever this was. I should have run, should have grabbed the gun and run, but I was frozen by the impossible horror of what I was seeing. "Why?" I managed to whisper. "Why are you doing this?" The tall figure, Joseph Dietrich, I assumed, tilted its head in a way that was distinctly inhuman. "We can't leave. Planted here. Roots hold us. Every year, new roots, growing through us, keeping us down." Its voice was filled with such anguish that I felt it in my chest. "You have to tell them. Tell them we're here. Tell them what he did." "What? Who did? Who buried you here?" "Brother." The figure's mouth moved awkwardly, like it was remembering how to form words. "My brother Thomas. Money. He wanted the farm. Killed us all. Planted us under the corn. Told everyone we left. Sold the farm. Lived in California until he died. The other figures were moving closer now, forming a tighter circle around me. I could smell them, rot and earth and growing things all mixed together. The children were the worst. Seeing those small, root-covered bodies, knowing they'd been murdered and buried by their own uncle, that they'd been trapped here in some kind of conscious nightmare for 70 years. It was too much. My legs nearly gave out. "I'll tell them," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll tell the police. They'll excavate this properly. They'll give you a real burial. I promise." "Not enough." The mother figure spoke now, her voice higher but no less terrible. "He lived free, died old. No justice, never punished. We stayed here, suffering, while he died happy. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but he's gone. There's nothing I can do about that now. You can make them remember." The father figure stepped even closer. I could see the roots pulsing slightly where they emerged from its chest, like they were pumping sap instead of blood. "You can make them know what happened here. You can make sure we're not forgotten again." And then I understood. They didn't want to hurt me. They wanted a witness. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll make sure everyone knows. I'll talk to newspapers, I'll talk to the police, I'll make sure your story gets told. But you have to stop. No more coming to my cottage. No more voices in the night. Please." The figures were silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, they began to back away into the corn. The father was the last to go. Before he disappeared into the shadows, he spoke one more time. "Thank you. We've been waiting so long for someone to look, to care." The others never did. They just kept planting over us year after year, ignoring what they felt, what they heard. But you looked. Then they were gone. The corn stood silent and still around me. I was alone in the clearing with the open grave and my flashlight and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I called 911. The investigation that followed turned a quiet Iowa farming community upside down for months. Sheriff Miller arrived within 30 minutes, followed by state police, county coroners, forensic teams. By sunrise, the North Field was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape and swarming with officials. Uncle Frank stood with me as we gave our statements, watching as they carefully excavated the grave I'd found. They recovered 5 bodies. Joseph Dietrich, age 41. Martha Dietrich, age 38. Children aged 12, 9, and 6. The remains were in poor condition after 70 years, but forensic analysis was conclusive. All 5 had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Murdered, then buried in a shallow grave and covered over. The property records and newspaper archives confirmed what the father's ghost had told me. Thomas Dietrich, Joseph's younger brother, had inherited the farm, sold it quickly, and moved to California. He died in 1987 in San Diego, never charged with any crime, never suspected of anything. The story made national news. Family's 70-year-old mystery solved ran the headlines. Reporters descended on Hickory Mills. I gave interviews, told the story of what I'd heard and seen, minus the parts about the figures in the corn. I wasn't ready to be labeled crazy on national television. I said I'd found the old newspaper article, decided to search the field on a hunch, and got lucky. Most people seemed to buy it. The Dietrich family was given a proper burial in the Hickory Mills Cemetery in early September. The whole town turned out for it. Distant relatives were tracked down. A few cousins, some great-grandchildren who'd never known what happened to their ancestors. They had a headstone now. They had a place that people could visit and remember them. They were no longer forgotten. Uncle Frank sold the farm in October. He'd had enough. Said he couldn't look at those fields the same way anymore, knowing what had been under them all those years. I didn't blame him. The new owners were a young couple from Des Moines who wanted to try organic farming. I met them once during the sale closing. They seemed nice. I didn't tell them everything. Some things are better left unsaid. I left Iowa in November and haven't been back since. But I still think about them every single day. I'm living in Minneapolis now, working a data entry job while I figure out what's next. I see a therapist twice a week. She's helping me process what happened, though I still haven't told her about the figures in the corn, about seeing the Dietrich family standing there, covered in roots, trapped between life and death by the very crops that had been planted over their grave, about how corn roots can grow 10 feet deep or more, spreading through the soil, touching everything beneath them, about how if you plant something over a body year after year, maybe the roots become confused about what's soil and what's flesh. Maybe they grow through both. Maybe that's what kept them there. The corn literally growing through them, season after season, binding them to the earth, holding them down. I don't eat corn anymore. Can't stand to look at it. Every time I see a cornfield, and there are plenty in Minnesota, I wonder what might be buried underneath it. How many forgotten graves might be out there under farms and fields with people trapped the way the Dietrichs were trapped, aware, suffering, waiting for someone to care enough to dig. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of a building in the city. No fields nearby, just concrete and cars and people. I should feel safe here, but sometimes, late at night, I hear sounds outside my window, rustling like corn stalks moving in the breeze. And once, just once, I woke up at 3 a.m. and looked out my window to see a figure standing in the parking lot below. Tall, thin, motionless, watching my window. When I blinked, it was gone. The therapist says it's PTSD, that my brain is still processing the trauma, creating phantom experiences based on what I went through. She's probably right. That's what I tell myself when I wake up from nightmares about being buried alive. Feeling roots pushing through my skin, being unable to move or scream while crops grow over me year after year. But sometimes I'm not so sure, because 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the new owners of Uncle Frank's farm. The woman's voice was shaky when she identified herself. Sarah, I think her name was. She and her husband had been living on the property for a couple months, getting ready for spring planting. Things had been fine at first, normal. But lately, she said, they'd been hearing things at night, footsteps around their house, voices in the fields. And 3 nights ago, she'd seen figures standing in the corn, except there was no corn yet, just the bare, plowed field waiting for spring planting. I know how this sounds, she said, but you lived there. Did you experience anything unusual? I didn't know what to tell her. The Dietrich family had been recovered, buried properly. They'd gotten justice, or as much justice as you can get 70 years later. They should be at rest. So why would something still be happening on that property? Unless it wasn't the Dietrichs. Unless there were others. How many farms are there in Iowa? How many cornfields? How many generations of family feuds, money troubles, dark secrets? I told Sarah I didn't know what she was experiencing. I told her to call the sheriff if she felt unsafe. I told her I couldn't help. Then I hung up and sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, feeling cold despite the heat being on, because I'd realized something. Thomas Dietrich had killed his brother's family for money, for the farm. He'd gotten away with it, lived a long life, died peacefully. No punishment. No justice during his lifetime, but he'd been buried in California. I'd found his obituary while researching the case. He had a grave in San Diego, a proper grave. The Dietrich family hadn't been looking for revenge on their killer. They couldn't. He was long dead and properly buried. So what had they wanted? What had they really wanted from me? They wanted someone to know. They wanted their story told. But maybe that's how it spreads. Because now I know. Now I can't stop thinking about it. About how many other stories might be buried under farmland across the country. About how many other families might be trapped the way the Dietrichs were. And the more I think about it, the more I research it, the more I become obsessed with finding them. With telling their stories. With digging up truths that have been buried. Is that what they wanted? For me to become someone who searches? Someone who digs? Someone who can't let it go? Or is there something else happening? because I've started having dreams about places I've never been, fields I've never seen, and in those dreams, I know exactly where to dig. I see the locations like coordinates burned into my brain. A farm in Nebraska, 40 yards north of an old oak tree. A field in Kansas near where a barn foundation used to be. A orchard in Missouri in the space between the third and fourth row. I haven't gone to any of these places. Not yet, but I'm starting to think I will. My therapist says I need to let it go. That I'm fixating because of trauma, trying to regain control by finding patterns where there might not be any. She's probably right about that too. But she can't explain the dreams. She can't explain why I wake up knowing things I shouldn't know. She can't explain why, when I looked up property records for that farm in Nebraska, there actually was an old oak tree marked on the survey from 1967. Or why, when I found old photos of the Kansas property, there really had been a barn there, torn down in 1954. I haven't told her about any of that. I haven't told anyone. But I'm writing it down now. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Maybe that's how it works. The knowledge passes from the buried to the finder, from the finder to the reader, spreading out like roots through soil. Maybe right now, as you're reading this, something is beginning to take root in your mind too. Maybe you'll start having dreams about places you've never been, about things buried that want to be found. Or maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe the isolation and fear broke something in my brain that hot Iowa summer, and everything that's happened since is just my mind trying to make sense of random trauma. But I don't think so, because last night I had the clearest dream yet. I saw a field in southern Illinois, near a town called Marion. I saw the exact location, beside an old grain silo, 30 feet east of where it stands. I saw what was buried there. A woman and her infant child, put in the ground in 1979 by a husband who told everyone they'd run off to Chicago. I saw their names, Rebecca and Emma. I saw how no one had looked for them because the husband was well-liked, because Rebecca had always been troubled, because it was easier to believe she'd abandoned her family than to suspect murder. And I woke up this morning knowing, not suspecting, knowing that if I drive to Marion, Illinois, if I find that grain silo, if I dig 30 feet to the east, I'll find them. Just like I found the Dietrichs. So here's my question, and maybe it'll become your question too. If you knew where a body was buried, if you knew someone had been killed and forgotten, would you go look? Would you dig up the truth even if it meant never sleeping properly again? Even if it meant seeing things in the shadows that shouldn't be there? Even if it meant becoming the kind of person who spends their nights researching missing persons cases and cold case files, who drives to small towns asking questions about farms and fields and families that disappeared. I haven't decided yet. I'm still sitting here in my apartment, 3 floors up from the concrete, looking at the map of Illinois on my laptop. Marion is 8 hours away. I could be there by tonight. I could have an answer by tomorrow morning. But what if I'm right? What if I find them? Then what? Do I call the police? Do I tell the story again? Become the guy who finds buried bodies, the guy who's either incredibly lucky or deeply disturbed or something worse? What happens when I find the 3rd one, the 4th one, the 10th one? At what point does it stop being coincidence and start being something else? And what if I don't go? What if I ignore the dreams, take more medication, find a new therapist, try to move on with my life? Will Rebecca and Emma stay buried forever? Will they become like the Dietrichs? Trapped, aware, suffering, waiting decades for someone to care enough to look? Can I live with myself if I don't at least try? The sun's coming up now. Friday, October 31st, 2025. 3 years and a few months since that summer in Iowa. Since I heard footsteps in the corn and decided to investigate instead of run. Since I made the choice that changed everything. I'm going to make another choice today. I think I'm going to drive to Marion. I think I'm going to look for that grain silo. And if I find what I expect to find, I'll make some calls, tell the story, and try to give Rebecca and Emma the same thing I gave the Dietrichs. A proper burial, a place to be remembered, a story that gets told. And then I'll probably have another dream. About another place, another person, another shallow grave in another field. Maybe that's just who I am now. Maybe that's what I became that night in the corn. Someone who finds the buried ones. Someone who tells the forgotten stories. Or maybe there's something else happening. Something I'm only starting to understand. Because the more I think about it, the more I wonder, what if Thomas Dietrich wasn't the first? What if this land, not just Uncle Frank's farm, but all of it, all these thousands of miles of farmland, what if it's full of secrets? What if people have been burying problems in fields for as long as there have been fields? Family members who disappeared, troublesome neighbors who knew too much, migrants who worked the harvest and nobody asked questions when they never came back. Indigenous people whose land this was before it became farmland, who might be buried in places nobody thinks to look. What if the corn grows through all of them? What if the roots connect them, create some kind of network under the soil? What if that's why I can feel them now, because I disturbed one connection, broke one root, and suddenly I'm part of the network too? That sounds crazy even as I type it. But then again, everything about this is crazy. The whole situation is impossible, and yet it happened. I have the forensic reports. I have the news articles. I have the photographs of 5 bodies being removed from a cornfield. I have the scratches still visible on my old cottage door. I have the memory of standing in the dark surrounded by dead things that moved and spoke. So maybe impossible things are just things we don't understand yet. I'm gonna pack a bag now. Throw in some clothes, my laptop, the shovel I bought last week when I admitted to myself I'd probably do this eventually. I'll grab coffee on the way out of town. Maybe I'll call Uncle Frank from the road. Let him know what I'm doing. He'll tell me I'm crazy, that I need to let it go, that I should focus on the living instead of the dead. He'd be right, but I don't think I can, because those dreams feel like someone calling for help. And maybe I'm the only one who can hear them. Maybe that's what happened in the corn. Maybe by finding the Dietrichs, by caring enough to dig, by telling their story, I became the person who listens, the person who answers. And if that's what I am now, then I have work to do. So I'm going. I'm driving to Marion, Illinois, and I'm going to look for Rebecca and Emma. And if you're reading this, if you've gotten this far, then maybe you understand. Maybe you feel it too. That pull toward the buried truth, that need to know what happened, that voice in your head saying someone has to care, someone has to look, someone has to remember. Or maybe you're starting to have the dreams too. Maybe that's how it spreads. Maybe by reading this, by following my story, you've become connected to whatever network exists under the soil. Maybe right now, even as you read these words, you're seeing a place you've never been. A field, a farm, a forgotten corner of nowhere. Maybe you're seeing coordinates, details, names. Maybe you're seeing where to dig. And if you are, I have to ask you, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to ignore it? Push it down. Tell yourself it's just your imagination, just a weird feeling from reading a creepy story online? Are you going to go about your normal life and try to forget? Or are you going to go look? Because I think that's the choice we all face eventually. When we encounter something that doesn't make sense, something that suggests the world is stranger and darker than we wanted to believe, do we turn away? Or do we step forward into the corn and see what's really there? I made my choice. I'm stepping forward. And now, 3 years later, I'm still stepping forward. Still digging. Still finding them. The sun's fully up now. It's time to go. Maybe I'll write again after Marion. Let you know what I found. Or maybe I won't. Maybe this is the last you'll hear from me. Maybe I'll just disappear into the back roads and small towns, searching field after field, following the dreams wherever they lead. But before I go, I want to leave you with one last thing. One last question that keeps me up at night. What if the corn isn't the only thing that knows how to take root? Think about it. Think about how stories spread. Think about how ideas plant themselves in your mind and grow. Think about how, right now, you're thinking about buried bodies in fields, about people who were forgotten, about dreams that show you where to dig. You're thinking about it because I told you about it. I planted it in your mind. And now it's growing, isn't it? Taking root, spreading tendrils through your thoughts. Maybe that's what the Dietrichs really did to me that night. Maybe they didn't just ask me to tell their story. Maybe they planted something in me that would keep spreading, that would find other people who could hear, other people who would start having the dreams. Maybe that's how the buried ones survive, by growing new roots through the living. And if that's true, if I'm right about any of this, then I need to apologize. Because by writing this down, by sharing it, by letting you read all the way to the end, I might have done to you what was done to me. I might have planted something. And the thing about roots is, once they start growing, they're almost impossible to stop. So tell me, are you going to go check that place you keep seeing in your mind? That field, that farm, that specific spot that's been nagging at you since about halfway through reading this? Are you going to dig? Or are you going to try to forget, knowing that every year the roots grow deeper, and whoever's down there waits a little longer, suffers a little more, hopes a little less? I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not sure there is one. All I know is the sun's up, Marion is 8 hours away, and Rebecca and Emma have been waiting since 1979. Time to go dig. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.